of it. Our love is what we make of it. Our love is what we make of it. Our love is what we make of it.
Sex for smart people. That means you.
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Welcome to Sex for Smart People. I'm just going to assume that everyone else in the world is also sick, so I just want to say I hope you all feel better soon.
Oh, Dave, I hope you feel better soon.
It's okay. 'Tis the season.
Yeah, 'tis the season. I'm just getting over mine. I am very excited about our guest on this episode. He is Dr. Michael Aaron. He has a PhD in clinical sexology. He works as a sex therapist and psychotherapist. And yeah, credentials. And he specializes. he specializes in such cool things in working with sexual minorities, sexual anxieties and dysfunctions, gender and orientation confusion. And as well as working with adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And I'm really drawn to his work in that he thinks about the relationship between male sexuality and aggression and the relationship between childhood sexual abuse, trauma, and adult sexual behavior, and power dynamics within relationships and society, and all of that good stuff.
Hey, school.
Yeah. So we're going to talk to Michael Aaron about his work, and then address some of your questions, and then do quickies where we rant about or endorse things.
Sounds like a good time.
Yeah, it is a good time.
Sounds like an episode of Sex for Smart People.
Well, Dave, it is an episode of Sex for Smart People.
Oh, so it's not just a clever name. Wait, I have to tell you. I don't know if I told you. I wrote a pickup line.
You wrote one?
I wrote a pickup line.
Okay.
Damn, girl.
I'm prepared.
Okay, damn, girl. Are you literally Jesus Christ? Because I'd let you ride my ass into Jerusalem.
Oh, God.
No, it's really good. It's perfect.
Oh, God. Oh, my God. That's perfect. Okay, wait, here's one.
Okay.
This might actually work on me as a thing.
Okay.
This my sister found. Hey, girl. Do you want to make a fragile human connection in the vast and unfeeling infinity of a chaotic universe?
Oh my God! Yeah, I know. I think if somebody tried that on me, that I would go with that.
I know. I might be a sucker for that.
Wait, I thought of another one.
What?
I'm still working on this one, but it's true what you've heard. My penis is called the 5 loaves and 2 fishes because this shit can feed 5,000.
Oh my God.
I'm trying to think of a whole group of biblical pickup lines and see what happens.
I don't know if the world can handle it, Dave, but
I'm pretty stoned on NyQuil. Apologies.
Well, I'm so glad we went there. Welcome, everybody.
It's gonna be good. Hey, Sex for Smart People. We're going to talk about stuff and sex and stuff.
And hopefully Dave will feel better soon. And yeah, and we're so glad, as always. I know we sound like broken records, but I just feel like we can't ever say this enough, that we're so thrilled that all of you are in conversation with us. And, I'm
thrilled that most of you are in conversation about us.
Most, yeah.
I'm kidding. It's all.
And Dave would like most of you to find us on Facebook and Twitter, and for most of you to subscribe to us on iTunes if you haven't already.
Except for you. Except for the one of you. You know who you are.
You know.
Facebook, Twitter. We have a phone. We have phone. We have telephone. You can find that on website.
Indeed. And now, on to the episode proper.
Enjoy!
Hello, welcome to Sex for Smart People. I'm Stephanie, and my preferred pronouns are she or they.
I'm Dave, and my preferred pronoun is he.
I'm Michael, and my preferred pronoun is he as well.
Cool. Michael, thank you so much for being here with us. I'm really excited to be in conversation with you.
We're super jazzed about this thing.
Sure, well, my pleasure to be here as well.
So we always kick things off with the question, what is your relationship to relationships?
So it's a pretty broad question, but I think that as a therapist, I am privy to seeing a lot of different relationships in my office. And I think one important thing that comes to my mind is that there's really no right way or wrong kind of relationship. I think there's a few key things that make relationships more effective or better than others, such as trust, communication, transparency, and so on. But the actual way that the relationship looks is very varied, and different relationships work for different people. And I think the trouble comes up for most people when they try to force a relationship to fit into some sort of cookie cutter or stereotype kind of thing that they feel is expected of them or something like that. And the best relationships are the ones where people are true to themselves, and that can take on a look of a myriad number of ways.
Cool. And I'd love to ask, what lit this particular fire under you to be a sexologist and sex therapist and work with people on creating intentional relationships?
For me, sex is very important. And why I wanted to be a therapist was I wanted to be a therapist, but I wanted to focus on something that was very important for me and something that was really not readily available for people. What I mean by that, maybe that was inarticulate, but what I mean by that is that a lot of therapists really have very little training in sexuality. They may have their own biases or their own inadequacies or insecurities about sex. So as a result, there really is a vacuum out there for people who struggle with their sexuality or who want to improve an aspect of their sexuality and to get really good help in that area. And so it's an important part of my life. I think it's an important part of who we are as humans, but yet there really is a great need out there for professionals who really understand how sexuality plays a part in people's lives. And very few therapists, unfortunately, are trained in this direction. So for me, it was a combination of my own personal interests as well as kind of a void out there in terms of these services being greatly needed for people out there.
So is there a place, if people are looking for therapy in New York City, around the country, around the world, is there some sort of litmus test to check to see if the person you're going to is going to be, I say sex positive to mean not going to be judgmental or to help you with a full understanding like the one you're talking about?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a certified sex therapist, and so if anyone's looking for someone who is knowledgeable in sex, I would suggest that they first and foremost look at making sure that this person is a certified sex therapist, and they'd be certified by this organization called AASECT. And what they can do, they can go to the website asect.org, they can look under Find a Practitioner or something like that, and then search geographically for people who are certified. There's other governing bodies. There is something called the American Board of Sexology. It's also very grueling in that you have to be a doctorate. You have to have at least a PhD or an MD, and you have to have also a whole bunch of stuff to have fulfilled. So that's another one. And I would also I would make sure that they're at least certified. I would also see what other kinds of things that they've accomplished on their CV. I would read their bio or read, what kinds of things. If they have a blog, a lot of therapists have blogs these days. See what kinds of things they write about. I actually went an extra step where I have a PhD in clinical sexology, which is very rare. There's only 3 programs in the entire country that have that kind of a program. And I think that speaks to the fact that sexology, which I think is a very important discipline, really doesn't get much attention and is underappreciated in our country. There are programs in Canada and Europe, but only 3 in the States.
Stephanie, do you want to move on to questions now? Or
let's do it.
Okay.
So Michael, we have a very sophisticated theme song for the crowdsource question. Ready? Ready, Dave?
Okay.
Crowdsource question!
Yeah!
I like it. If we had a video, would there be like those hand-drawn cards or whatever like that, you know?
Oh, the cue cards?
The cue cards. That would be nice.
That was when you yell, yeah.
Dave, will you read the crowdsource question for today?
Yeah, sure. The crowdsource question is, I've been with my boyfriend for 2 years now, and we keep falling more and more in love with each other. Overall, things are great, but I've noticed that lately my sex drive is significantly less than what it was when we first got together. He still wants to have sex pretty frequently. I feel like doing it sometimes, but not as much as he does. We've talked about it, and he's okay with this imbalance, but still I wonder, is there something I can or should be doing to keep my level of desire for him where it once was?
And so thank you so much to everybody who wrote in responses to this. We're going to read 3 of them before Michael, Dave, and I riff on this as well. Response number 1 is, "Hey, SFSP, longtime listener, first-time writer. I have a response to the person with the high sex drive boyfriend. I'm going to call her a her because I tried to use the female pronoun as the generic one. First, yeah, cheers to that. First, this is not a major problem. Most relationships encounter these hydraulic imbalances over the years, and as long as they both feel okay about it, it's all right. Second, there are some possible workarounds. They might try to find forms of sex that get him off but don't put any pressure to feel sexual on her. A friendly hand job or him jerking off on her while she writes her novel. Maybe they can eroticize and play around with him wanting to fuck her but not being allowed to. If they're comfortable with it, he could have sex with someone else on occasion to let off some of that steam and then come home and tell her about it in a really hot way. But whatever they do, they should not try to brute force this. You can will yourself to do that extra pull-up, but you should really, really, really not will yourself to have that extra fuck. Trying to psych yourself into wanting sex more than you do is a recipe for learning to dislike sex, and making your partners dislike having sex with you. So, while they should be playful and creative about coming up with sexy solutions for this non-huge problem, they need to both be respectful of the limits of her desire. That means both making sure that she's not fucking more than she wants to, but also making sure she's not feeling bad about it. Sexual desire is like a souffle. It collapses under pressure."
Hey, first-time writer, could you write in a lot?
That was pretty good.
That was awesome.
Was this
awesome.
also a therapist answering that?
Yeah. Will you read response number 2, Dave?
Okay, response number 2. It's a natural effect of a long-term relationship that aspects of the relationship will wax and wane. The primary thing is to not panic when these things happen, and it looks like you're doing a good job with this. Being open to your level of desire for him increasing as well as decreasing will help you remain flexible and not get back into a corner of he always wants to do it, I never want to do it. That sort of thing becomes self-fulfilling and difficult to get out of. Another thing that helps keep fire in a long-term relationship is building a repertoire of games and or moments that really get you going. Ideally both of you, but since it's your libido we're trying to boost here, we can settle for things that he's neutral about if they really do it for you. Things like power exchange, role-playing, role reversal, and so on will let you step out of your routine and try other ways of relating to each other. You don't say anything about where you fall on the kinky, vanilla spectrum, but any amount of disruption to a routine can get things sparking. Finally, there's evidence to show that a certain amount of going through the motions can actually help you feel the way you're acting. Smiling makes you actually happier, for instance. I'm not saying you should make your life into some kind of horrible charade, just that a week or so of acting as hot for him as you can manage might make you start to feel actually hot for him, at which point you're not faking it anymore.
Cool. And response number 3 is this person on hormonal birth control? Sometimes that changes the libido. So those are our responses for today. Thank you so much, all of you who wrote in.
Thanks, crowd, for sourcing your questions.
Can I dive in and kind of synthesize and kick things off for us? I really like these responses in conversation with each other, and holy shit, our listeners are wise. I feel for the person who wrote in. I mean, obviously, it's so rare to have two people with libidos who are perfectly well matched, and of course things wax and wane. I really like what the first person said about creativity in terms of eroticizing limitations, and I totally agree that nobody should be made to feel bad about this, but I think ultimately I come down on the side that like sex begets sex, and what the second responder pointed out, I think is pretty right on. I do think you have a choice in terms of how much to prioritize sex, and that in a relationship with a sexual nature, there's kind of a responsibility to show up in whatever ways are reasonable or possible, and not that anybody should force it, but to choose or be intentional about putting attention there, to thinking creatively, devoting time to fantasizing about your partner, to put energy into shaking up the routines. I think that's all great stuff. I mean, I think, of course, there could be, hormonal birth control can affect things, or if, of course, there are maybe something else, something larger is going on. But ultimately, while I agree you shouldn't push it, I do think that just like putting care and attention there is an important thing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Was there anything in any of those responses, Michael, that stuck out to you as potentially problematic or anything?
No. Well, what stuck out was these were some really damn good responses.
Holler.
Yeah. Our listeners are sexy.
You guys have some really sophisticated listeners. This is good stuff. I think the first thing, anytime somebody sees some kind of a drop in their desire or anything, or performance or arousal kind of template or anything, or the way they achieve their usual habits of arousal and so on, I think it's a good idea just to go to a medical doctor and get a checkup just to make sure there's nothing physical going on. I mean, with this woman, maybe there's something biological or hormonal. I'm not sure what the age group is. I think it was 40s, so maybe there's something going on there.
I don't think the writer mentioned an age. Actually.
All right. Well, it's still worth checking out. It doesn't hurt. But I think that the reader has really hit the nail on the head in terms of you don't want to force an issue. One thing that the second person said, what they were referring to is the narrative, and so I think that I think that a lot of I think a lot of couples get into these kinds of relational patterns that feel stuck because of these kinds of narratives that take over, and it sort of becomes an identity that they just grow into, and so I think keeping things, what all the respondents said about keeping things fresh, creative. I mean, there's a lot of suggestions there about role play, about seeing if there's I'd be curious to know what does she want. She says she doesn't want sex that as much, but when she does want sex, what is it that she finds stimulating? What are her fantasies right now? And maybe pay a little more attention to that. Maybe they find themselves in a rut where she feels that his sexual, his love map or template or whatever you want to call it is being more focused on, I don't know. But if she still has a sex drive, and it sounds like she does, maybe the key to kind of unlocking things a bit is to focus on what is it that's really arousing her these days, and paying a little more attention to it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I think, hey, listeners, way to go with those responses. I think that's there's some really wise suggestions, and to the person who wrote in the original question, I think I think trying the power play or situational play or role play or role reversal or is going to yield interesting results, even if it doesn't fix the problem. And I'm putting both of those words in air quotes. I think that you'll discover some interesting /cool/fun things along the way. And good luck. I think this can lead to zestiness in figuring this out.
Yeah, and I'd also like to say, when people find themselves encountering challenges, I often try to help people understand that challenges can sometimes be, and often are, opportunities. Mm. Like when we find ourselves stuck, we need to problem solve and be creative to find solutions. And oftentimes these solutions are the things that we wish we had a long time ago. So the fact that they're experiencing some difficulty right now maybe is an opportunity to learn a little bit more about themselves that will serve them well in the future.
Totally.
Yeah, it might open up things that they haven't gotten to explore yet. And there's two other things that are coming to mind in kind of like a burning way for me. I think I think, Michael, what you were talking about shaking up the narrative is so important and so often difficult. And one way that I like thinking about that is that it may be less useful to think of things in terms of like enough or not enough or more or less, but maybe instead in terms of like, well, what do you need here? What does each partner need? And work from that, which then we don't know how great the disparity is of the person who wrote in, if it's a very large disparity or not. And the other thing is something I really love, Esther Perel's Mating in Captivity. It's a book that I really like. I'm curious what you think about that, Michael. But the thing that I love about that book is that instead of saying, like, I think all these suggestions are amazing, you know, like shake things up, have a new routine, don't get stuck in a narrative, all that stuff. But the kind of holistic thesis that she has is, sure, all those things are great, do them all, absolutely, but also to cultivate a checking in with and a remembering that everyone, even and especially those we know the best, are continually a mystery, because the unknown is often the most sexy, and so like as well as we know anyone, we can't really like take them for granted. And so I think maybe often what goes on when there's this kind of disparity is feeling like, oh yeah, we know what each other is about, and there's like less excitement. But if we can remember, and I know it's not the easiest, but if we can remember that there's just so much depth of stuff to learn about everybody and our intimate partners continually, and that everyone is inevitably a mystery, I think that's a great mindset to be working from, whichever one of these other paths or ideas you also explore.
I think, you know, the book is a huge hit, and I think it's because it speaks to a very universal experience, which is the fact that when we start to feel more comfortable and safe and familiar with someone else, it can take away a large measure of the mystery and the intrigue that is sexually appealing. I think people who've been together a long time, they need to still keep dating. I think this idea of dating just, you know, being something that leads up to marriage or some kind of long-term commitment or whatever, people date when they're getting to know each other. I think dating is sort of like a necessary component of any relationship.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and different things. You know, try a new restaurant, try a new experience, surprise somebody.
Yeah, not just shaking things up sexually, but shaking things up relationally.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very easy to fall into a rut, and sex is oftentimes, you know, the thing I tell my clients is that, you know, sex is often just the tip of the iceberg. And so what that means is a lot of people's difficulties are more global in nature. So if someone, for example, is selfish sexually, they're probably selfish in other areas of their life. If somebody's very anxious sexually, they're probably anxious in a lot of other areas in their life. If you find yourself in a rut sexually, you're probably in a rut in other areas of your life. So, you know, sometimes focusing too much on the sex is sort of like trying to get to sleep by asking yourself, am I asleep yet? Am I asleep? You know, you just relax and maybe think about something nice about the day or listen to soft music and you'll fall asleep. So, you know, focusing on something with such narrow blinders often creates a lot of pressure and anxiety about it. And so maybe oftentimes being hyper-focused on the sex is actually hindering people from having better sex. And maybe some of these relational issues of creating surprise, intrigue, mystery, having new experiences, experiencing each other in new ways by doing different things, like this dating thing that we're talking about, that will lead into the bedroom, you know. And if people feel like they can see each other with fresh eyes, like, wow, I never knew you liked Ethiopian, or I never knew you liked jumping off a bungee cord, or whatever it is, then all of a sudden, like, hey, I'm having sex with a new person here.
I love that perspective.
Totally.
Are we good to...
For falling asleep for good thoughts, by the way, you can always do what I do, which is just to think about how everyone who ever lived is dead. It's really calming. It's really good.
Sure,
Oh, man.
I think we're getting off topic here, but there's something about sleep which is like, oh man, I'm not going to be unconscious for the next. So I don't know. That speaks to this idea about death, but all the best of us have all been there, so it's not a bad. I don't know. What? Hey, listen, if it works for you, more power to you.
Working is a broad term here. I'll say back on the idea of dating that I think this may be something that I said in another episode, but that's okay. I'm going to it's something that I really like to say when talking about relationship stuff, which is that a reminder that a relationship is something you do, not something you have.
I love that.
And a lot of people, I feel like, see dating as the means to an end. And once a relationship is achieved, the end is reached, the goal is scored, the game is won, and now you can relax. And I think that that's not the best or even, let's say, most practical perspective to have on this. That relating is a constant thing, and that we can get more comfortable with each other, and we can get more comfortable relating with each other or to each other. But that act of still relating to and finding out about the people that you're with is going to be fruitful, and I think it's a good thing to keep in mind, even if you've been with somebody for years and years. Remember that you're doing the relationship, not having it.
Cheers to that. The next question is, I'm a straight female, married and in my 40s. I feel very lucky that my husband and I still have sex often, and we still enjoy each other a lot after being together over 13 years. We have an awesome, respectful connection, sexual and otherwise, and we are both pretty happy in life in general. But I've recently gotten honest with myself about a trend with what flashes through my mind when I masturbate, or even sometimes when I have an orgasm with my husband. I think of being raped, sometimes very violently, sometimes by more than one man. I have listened to enough Dan Savage to know that these kinds of fantasies can be normal and not twisted at all, but still it gives me pause. I can't help but think, is there something wrong with me? Are these thoughts self-destructive? The more I indulge these thoughts, the more pleasurable sex becomes. Should I be indulging in them freely, or should I be seeking help? And should I tell my husband about this? If so, how?
Okay, so Dan Savage is right. These are very common fantasies. I think going back to what I had mentioned a moment ago about sex is just the tip of the iceberg. Anytime we have any kind of sexual fantasies or ideas or fetishes, there's often some kind of a psychological component to it. Sex is, off the top of my head, I will say never. I mean, never say never, but let's say rarely it just stands alone without any kind of, it's just there on its own without any connection to any other aspect of the person. And so oftentimes these kinds of rape fantasies have to do with kind of a feeling of wanting to surrender and be kind of aggressively handled, where you don't have to be responsible for anything, or the person who is being sexual with you is not inhibiting their aggression. And I think that there's this kind of psychological aspect to the arousal of a rape fantasy. There was a psychoanalyst who wrote a really good book about sex fantasies called Arousal. His name is Michael Bader. I highly recommend. And he talked a lot about the kind of psychological component of why certain people find the things that they find arousing. That's not to say there's always a psychological component, or to say that, because that could lead us to another area altogether. But I think in the case of rape fantasies, there is something to be said about why that's appealing. And, whether or not she should communicate it to her husband. I'm always on the side of getting into relationships in a transparent way, being mindful of who you are and being able to communicate it from the start in a relationship. I think that there's a lot of shame about sex. There's also a lot of fear about how the other person will respond. That keeps a lot of people, like, so to speak, in the closet about what it is that they like. The ideal is to be able to talk about it, especially since it's not pathological. There's nothing wrong with it. And you never know, he may find it to be arousing himself. And maybe he would, jump at the opportunity to be a part of it. Maybe, oftentimes, what sounds like we're talking about here is a couple, they've been together for a while, and there's certain things that they haven't discussed. Sometimes maybe being able to discuss it in a structured way with a sex therapist or something would be very helpful. I think, though, that her life would be much better if she's able to communicate about it in a way that doesn't feel shameful to her, and that whether he can do it on his own or if he has help, to be able to understand that part of her and hop on board with the fact that this is something that's appealing to her. If it's not appealing to him, find some kind of way to compromise or get her needs met in a way that works for both of them.
Yeah, I want to reiterate something that you said at the beginning, and just to respond to one of the questions in the email, which is, no, there's nothing wrong with you. Just very clearly, there's nothing wrong with this fantasy. It's super common. Sex fantasies are often, what society would deem weird, and probably, I'm guessing, if pressed, that the fantasy element of it is part of it, that you don't actually want to be raped, in the same way that I have kinks that, I don't actually want them to be real, but it's fun to indulge them because, the sex brain can be a complicated, twisty thing, and it can be super fun. But acknowledging that fantasy, that sex play is a perfectly appropriate time to indulge in fantasy. But yeah, I think you're right that, there could be repercussions about bringing this up, because some people are freaked out by this sort of talk. I think you'll have a better idea, to the person writing in, I think you'll have a better idea of how he'll respond. But bringing this up part of a check-in about your sex lives in general may be a good idea of just saying to him, where are you in our sex life, or do you have any fantasies? Bringing this up as in a context of being sexually open and honest with each other might be a good idea.
Yeah, and also, I think this is important to articulate and just make clear that having a rape fantasy doesn't mean that the person actually wants to be raped, right? It's, it's a structured, if they want to.
Consensual power play. Consensual. Consent being the key word.
Consensual.
Totally. Yeah.
For some folks, they have fantasies, and if they try them, they don't really like them.
Yep.
And they're best as just a fantasy. It's very arousing to masturbate about it, and in real life, it loses its appeal. And, then there are fantasies that they want to act upon, but of course it's consensual in a very kind of safe framework. But also in terms of how she can communicate it to him, I would, she could do it in graded steps. It doesn't necessarily, she has to sit down and say, I really want you to rape me, or I have this rape fantasy. She doesn't even, I'm not sure she should use the word rape right from the start. But maybe she could talk about the fact that maybe it may be appealing, or she's been thinking it's been arousing for her to be a little bit more rough and play around with increasing the intensity a bit. Or if he surprises her in terms of when he has sex with her. Or she really liked it when he kind of grabbed her roughly around the waist or something. She could bring it up in a way that feels sort of like dipping her toe in the water and not really having to go right for the rape aspect.
Or giving positive reinforcement to something that's already happened. That's
Correct.
And I also
so.
think it's so cool. Like, I mean, as it's no secret, I'm a huge proponent of full disclosure and open communication. And I think
you are
really shocker. But I just think it's so exciting to grapple with, how do I bring this up? What if this freaks him out? Because then what if it doesn't? And what things has he not been bringing up? Maybe he's into parallel things or not parallel things that you would try because it's good for him, and he'd try this because it's good for you, even if he's not into it. And I just look at this as a potentially really exciting moment, and for this person's connection. But also, Michael, I love a recent blog post that you wrote, riffing on the newest research about how, I'm going to paraphrase, but people who practice BDSM are often more, is it mentally stable? That feels like the wrong term, but then those who do not, or some. I'm horribly paraphrasing. I'm wondering if you can talk about that blog post a little bit. I was excited to read it, and I think this also speaks to her. Is this self-destructive? Is there something wrong with me?
Yeah, well, there was a study that was published, I think last summer, maybe June, in a very reputable journal. I forget what it was. I think it was a journal of sexual medicine, which is a very reputable journal. It was two psychologists in the Netherlands, and they interviewed well over 1,500, maybe 14, whatever, well over 1,000 respondents, both who were self-described as kinky, meaning BDSM activity, and those who were not. And the questions were testing for a variety of psychological criteria. And basically the researchers found that the kinky cohort scored better on a whole bunch of stuff, such as extroversion and being less shame-based, having less shame, being more open-minded, being more conscientious. And that's just some of the criteria there. So some of the dimensions. And so this isn't actually the first study that's come out that has shown that kinky behavior is not pathological. There's been a handful of studies that have come out. There was one in Finland that basically stated the same thing, that kinky people were not pathological at all and were quite normal. And so I think for the longest time, one of the very important thing is that we're seeing changes in the way that the psychiatric establishment sees kinky behavior.
It's still really widespread prejudices against it, of course.
Yes. And
I love that this research flies in the face of that.
Yeah, that's a very important. Important point, because I think that the whole kinky BDSM thing is sort of where the LGBT community was maybe in the 70s. I think they're about 40 years behind. And let me explain what I mean. So in the DSM that just came out in June 2013, the DSM-5, and so the DSM stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. By the way, there's no statistics there. It's just called the DSM to sound more official and scientific. It's not really that scientific. It's just a bunch of folks sitting on committees voting yes or no. And so in the latest DSM version 5, it came out in June 2013, they, in essence, depathologized kinky behavior. So before, there was a term called paraphilia. Paraphilia is a term from the 1920s. There was this guy, this psychoanalyst, Steckel was his last name, who coined the term paraphilia, which is consists of the Latin roots para and philia, as in paranormal. Para means above and beyond, philia means love. So this is love that's just beyond the norm, so paraphilia. It became popularized in the 1970s by a sexologist named John Money, who had...
That's a good name.
John Money.
He had a class. He taught a class at Johns Hopkins called Sexy Money. So... he used his name to his advantage. And he said a lot of interesting things. In many ways, he was wrong about a number of things as well. But he was writing in the 70s and 80s. And so he was going by the information he knew at the time. And And so he came up with a whole kind of lexicon of different paraphilias, different kind of fetishes. He named them. There was, there was hundreds and hundreds of different kinds of philias, from, necrophilia, which is, being aroused by dead bodies, to, pedophilia, obviously. We know what that is. There's hundreds of philias. And so in 1980, when the DSM-3 came out, by the way, they all come out like about 12 or 13 years apart. In 1980, when it came out, we first saw the use of the word paraphilia in the DSM, and there were 9 paraphilias. So there was pedophilia, there was transvestic fetishism, which is basically a man dressing up as a woman. There was voyeurism, there was exhibitionism, there was pedophilia, there was fraudurism, which is basically rubbing your genitals against the buttocks, and sadism and masochism, and maybe I'm missing 1 or 2 because I forget how many I've already have stated off. And then there was paraphilia NOS, which basically meant not otherwise specified, which meant every other paraphilia that we could dream of goes in this bucket. And the criteria was that this was this kind of sexual behavior that was abnormal or non-normative, and it caused distress, and it was unhealthy, and it's a problem. It's a pathology. So in the DSM that just came out, they separated paraphilia. Paraphilia is no longer a pathological term, and they created a term called paraphilic disorder. The difference between a paraphilia and a paraphilic disorder is that a paraphilic disorder is something that is non-consensual, like a sex offender who goes around, for example, someone who goes around with a trench coat and flashes women and bothers them. That's non-consensual, so that would be a paraphilic disorder. So it's non-consensual, and it causes distress to a person that's not based on societal values. Mm-hmm. That's a big one. Because I could be into something, but because if I told someone, they'd be horrified. I'm ashamed. I'm in distress. So that would be a pathology, right? So let's say I'm into feet, and I told my wife or girlfriend or boyfriend or anybody that I was into feet, and they're like, "Oh my God, you're this cretin." And I said, "Oh my God, I need to go to the psychiatrist. I have this disorder." You would have a disorder because you were distressed by it, mm-hmm. right? Now the difference is that the distress cannot be caused by societal values or by societal norms, and that's very significant because most of people's distress comes from social values. Mm-hmm. I shouldn't be into drinking urine because society will think it's disgusting. So that is no longer considered pathological. So that's 2013, just as in 1973, when homosexuality was taken out of the DSM. It was depathologized. That was literally 40 years ago. That's why I'm saying that all this BDSM and kinky behavior is 40 years behind the gay movement. And now, 40 years later, we're seeing 17, 18 states have legalized same-sex marriage, including Utah, of all places. So it's taken that long. So I'm saying it would take 30 or 40 years for someone to be able to say, you know what, I'm into X, Y, Z, and I'm damn proud of it, and feel no shame. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, there is a psychotherapist who has done a lot in terms of sexual freedom and sexual rights. His name is Guy Baldwin. And he's written a lot of books, but one book he wrote that really resonated with me is called Ties That Bind, and it's sort of a collection it's an anthology of different articles he wrote in a magazine. And one of the articles was called A Second Coming Out, and which he described he's gay and kinky. And so being gay was the first time, coming out about that was a first coming out. Mm-hmm. But then coming out as kinky was a second coming out, and he felt it was as difficult, if not more difficult, than coming out as gay. For a lot of reasons. You would think that a lot of sexual minorities would necessarily because they're minorities themselves, would be understanding of each other. That's not necessarily the case. For example, he's a leather guy, so which means that he's a kinky. I mean, it means something different now, but he identifies as a leather, kinky, gay guy. And so, as he writes in The Ties That Bind, a lot of the gay community doesn't see that positively, right? Mm-hmm. So being the fact that he's gay and kinky is not necessarily mean that he's going to be welcomed with open arms. Mm-hmm. So where this woman, back to where this woman's at, it's going to take a long time for some of these societal shackles to come off. Uh-huh. But in terms of her own personal work, I'm here to tell her, and so are you and Dave, to tell her that it's normal. And there are people around her there are groups of people who understand this and can help her to normalize it and help her to live life in a way that doesn't feel shame-based.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I want to throw in two extra thoughts. One is just that the world that I would like to see is one in which those who have identities and sexualities that are not the dominant ones or the normative, that our collective power is so much stronger than if we're all in factions of the gay or the kinky or the non-monogamous or the polyamorous or the swingers. I love what you brought up, Michael, with that example about the man who wrote Ties That Bind, that all of these movements are in conversation with each other, even if on different timelines. And then also just another resource to throw out to maybe this person who wrote in the question, but also maybe others who have fantasies about consensual power exchange, but maybe haven't started to explore that yet, or even those who have started to explore but just want to read more. I really love the new topping book and the new bottoming book by Dossie Easton and Janet Hardy, and I think that that even if you identify as a bottom, it's great to read the topping one too. I think it's very accessible and there's great stuff in there. It's a great kind of gateway if that's something you're interested in exploring more. And I don't need to have the last word. Any other last words on this before we wrap up?
Well, just piggyback off what you said, the wonderful thing about the time that we live in now is that there's a lot more information out there. You know, there's websites like FetLife, for example, right? I mean, not all the books are wonderful, but there's tons of books out there on a variety of topics, right? And the information is out there online, they're out there in books, and people can find it. People can find community, people can find resources that maybe before they couldn't. Mm-hmm. So, you know, I say 30, 40, maybe things are escalating quickly and they're going to take a lot less time because we have a lot more access to technology and as a result, a lot of more information.
Mm-hmm.
Yay.
I hope you're right.
I hope you're right too. Shall we on to quickies?
Yeah, totally.
So quickies is where we each just rant about something or endorse something, anything we want to talk about. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I want to endorse, since last time I ranted about how terrible Love Actually is, I thought this time I would endorse something that I'm really, really into, which is a song by TV on the radio called Lover's Day.
Oh, that's my favorite song too.
It's so good. It's a song about sex that's joyful and joyous and ends with with brass music playing and a choir singing.
Choir. It's so good.
And I just wanted to read a couple of the lyrics just so you know why the song is so good. Swear to God it'll get so hot it'll melt our faces off. Then we can see the you, the me, beyond mirrors, outside clock. Held naked in the light, so soft, get off. Ball so hard we'll smash the walls, break the bed and crash the floors. Don't stop, laugh and scream. Have the neighbors call the cops. Till all the eyes that have seen our fire play. Can't forget, mark it down, call it Lover's Day.
Oh, and my favorite lyric of that is, tear apart the apart we seem to think we are.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a good song.
Oh,
and
it's so good.
It's so exciting and so has such a fun, awesome, beautiful rendition of sex in song form, and you should listen to it and dance. It'll be great.
Yay! Michael, do you want to go or should I?
Why don't you go ahead?
Okay.
I'm thinking.
I want to endorse this really excellent book that I just finished that I've been meaning to read for a while. It's called Straight, The Surprisingly Short History of Heterosexuality. And the author is this historian, Hannah Blank. And she's married to a male-identified person who has a penis, but also an extra X chromosome. And when they're together, they're frequently mistaken for a lesbian couple, and yet they can still really easily access heterosexual privilege. But she kind of her way into this is the question of, like, does she check the box heterosexual, or what would that mean for them to? And so she writes about how heterosexuality came about as an identity as late as the late 19th century, and the term wasn't even coined until then, and it was invented to make a case for hetero and homosexual identities as different but equal, but of course soon heterosexuality got conflated with normativity and better and right, and as opposed to other things which were lower class and trashy and perverted. And I mean, I always love learning more about the intersection between sex politics and race and class politics. But what I really love most about this book is she just takes on so many of what we consider to be like omnipresent acknowledgments or like common sense, not just that part that I shared about sexual orientation, but also gender identity, also about marriage, which for most of human history had nothing to do with love or sex, about childbearing, the politics of pleasure. I'm so fascinated by her talking about the evolution of dating habits and like what a relatively new phenomenon or concept dating is, and how we make it cool today, but it really it was very quickly commodified and made consumerist, dating as the man pays for the experiences, and the woman pays to make herself conventionally beautiful for the male gaze, and that when the beauty industry started popping up all around, basically like the invention of dating, so that can be a cool freedom thing, but it also is really complex in that consumerist way. And I mean, I've thought about all this stuff a lot before, but this book connects the dots in more thorough ways than I knew. And I think
better or worse than 50 Shades of Grey?
Oh God! Don't get me started again.
Sorry.
But I guess I was going to talk about it in relationship to Sex at Dawn, which I know a lot of people have read and love. I like Sex at Dawn, but don't love it because I don't know about evolutionary psychology, and I think it gives a little more credence to noble savage ideas than I tend to agree with. But I really appreciate the way that Sex at Dawn kind of shook up, like in a little bit of a wider conversation about things that we hold as like sacred or obvious, like may not be. And I think that this book does that, but maybe even more effectively, and it's talking really just an analysis of the past couple hundred years of history of these things that we consider normal in society, and it just rocked my world. And I hope that I can't endorse it highly enough, and hope that a lot of people read it.
Cool.
Well, Stephanie, I think a lot of what you're referring to there from a therapist's perspective, in terms of where therapists go wrong and where they could really learn from these books that you mentioned, is kind of in the definition and the conceptualization of intimacy. As you said, modern marriages, in terms of marrying for love and so on and so forth, is kind of a very new idea. Most people just got together because it was, they needed to have more kids to help out with the farm, or, for some other economic reasons. And we live in a much more atomized and alienated kind of environment where families don't live together and so on. And so there's this kind of pressure to that the one person that we're with is supposed to fulfill all of our needs, and that they're going to love us, and they're going to do this and that and all that, and that feeds into this kind of, I think, very wrong and kind of imaginary, fantastical idea of intimacy. If we feel like we want to get some of our needs met outside of that one relationship, then I'll find you a number of therapists that will tell you have an intimacy problem. Mm-hmm. Right? If you feel that there's more to life than just eye gazing at each other, and you want to try some role play, I'll find you a dozen therapists that'll tell you have an intimacy problem. So I think that our idea, and I think it's being kind of also pushed by the kind of therapy world, is this kind of really abstract and overdone idea of what intimacy is. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that we're so alienated that most people just maybe live with their significant other and a handful of friends. And so there's a lot of pressure that person's supposed to be your one and only and your everything.
Yeah, and recognizing that's such a recent phenomenon as an idea, even.
Yes. Yes. And so just to say that we don't need to pathologize the fact that there are many people, 100% of people, who find it impossible to get all of their needs met by one single person, and that's not an intimacy problem.
Mm-hmm.
Rad. Is there something particularly that you wanted to endorse or rant about?
Well, I'll just endorse, finding really good resources for education. We're talking about books. I think there's a lot of really good stuff out there that's very intellectual and really approaches the things that we're talking about from a very kind of sophisticated and thoughtful way. And here in New York, I'll recommend one particular educator who I find to be very outstanding. His name is Eric Pride. You can look at his website, ericpride.com. He writes. He does presentations and workshops. He probably has 30 different workshops that he does, but he approaches alternative relationships from a very thoughtful, intellectual, and sophisticated way. He talks about getting involved in relationships, getting out of relationships, structuring relationships, getting different needs met within relationships. And so I think anyone who's based in New York can come out and see him talk. I think he's brilliant.
Is that Pride, Pride?
Eric Pride, Pride, right? And I think his website is just ericpride.com. So, but people like him, we need more people like him who are spokespeople, who are very intelligent, very thoughtful, and present these kinds of concepts in a way that is not sensationalistic and that really presents it in a way that really raises the level of discourse.
Rad. Okay. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
So that's it for episode 7 proper. Thank you so much to Dr. Michael Aaron and to Owen O'Malley, our awesome mix engineer, and to all of you for being in conversation with us. And
Word.
On our next episode, we have amazing, pretty much a superhuman, Cole Park, who's also a friend of mine. She worked with Soul Force for many years, with organizing between queer communities and communities of faith, and right now she works at this think tank called Political Resource Associates in Boston, where she's concentrating on tracking right-wing evangelical Christians in the U.S. and the role that they play in the exportation of politicized homophobia and transphobia around the world. And she's just doing all kinds of noble work to move toward creating a safer and more just world for everybody. And I'm so thrilled to know her and so thrilled that she'll be joining us next time.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It also sounds like a pretty good opportunity for us to continue to think up more Bible pickup lines.
Is there ever a time that's not a pretty good opportunity for that?
No. Well, we're also going to extend our crowdsource question to that one. So just as a reminder, what our crowdsource question is I'm a straight guy, 27 years old, and I am crazy about my girlfriend of 2 years. We have awesome chemistry, and for the most part, the sex is great, but she gets really uncomfortable when I go down on her, like she doesn't trust that I'm having fun, which I totally am. How can I help her open up to it? So, yeah, write us in about that. Call us, because as you recall, we have telephone.
Yeah.
Our phone number is 662-626-SFSP. Once again, that's 662-626-SFSP. You can leave us a message, and we'll listen to it like your actual human voice.
Absolutely. So thanks again, and we'll see you next time.
Rock on.
Bye.
Two-person dance parties are the sexiest.
Edward Snowden is the sexiest.
The American Health Care Act is the sexiest.
All right.
Yay!